Okay, so today's talk is by Hyun Bang Shin from the LSE. I'll introduce him in a minute. I should forewarn you that Hyun's been teaching since till 6 o'clock at the LSE today, so be gentle with him for the questions. He's had a hard day. He's very kindly agreed to come in very late for us because I was very keen for us to be able to address this condition of gentrification, not just in the local conditions or even like as a Western phenomenon, but as a kind of global or planetary conditions within the logics of development of urban spaces. And I think it's fundamental to Hyun's work. Just to introduce Hyun, he's Associate Professor in Geography in the Department of Geography at the LSE. If you go to the LSE website, it's a fantastic range of talks, both within this area and more generally social sciences. And he's been working and developed, I think, with some colleagues, this notion of planetary gentrification, which speaks to we were discussing a bit earlier, I think speaks to the logics of gentrification, which may not look like, what gentrification looks like in one place may not be what is. I don't want to preempt the talk too much, but I think this notion of gentrification, not just as a local phenomenon, but as a planetary condition, is something that's important for us to understand in addressing what's happening to cities through globalization and the transformation of identity. So I'll hand over to Hyun in a minute, just to say that we'll do the usual format, half an hour talk, a few questions from me to start the discussion, then we'll throw it open. Let's try and keep it to an hour and a half, because we want to do it in 10 minutes. Let me go to this. Jeff Stein.
Okay, so if I speak like this, you can all hear from me at the back, right? Okay, that's good. So, just a small correction. My first name, the first part of my first name is Hyun, not Hyan, by the way. Not very important, but it's important for my family. What I'm going to say in the next 35 minutes is really about this new, to some extent is kind of speaking to the new book that came out earlier this year, the Planetary Gentrification, which I co-authored with Routledge, who is at University of Leicester, and also Ernesto Lopez Morales, who is in University of Chile in Santiago. So three of us have been working on this gentrification issues during the last 4 years. Produced a co-edited volume which came out last year with the title of Global Gentrifications in plural format. So, and then 2 other special issues, one from Urban Studies earlier this year and another from Urban Geography. So 2 special issues from journals plus the Global Gentrifications edited volume from last year, and this book called the Monograph, which came out earlier this year. So these are kind of a collection of efforts that we put together to understand or to have a renewed understanding of what gentrification means in different parts of the world. So what I'm going to kind of share today is really kind of the essence of the book, plus some of the recent studies of mine, especially coming from East Asian context, and especially the last probably 10 minutes I would like to spend on introducing some of the efforts from South Korea, by the way, from Seoul, where I come from initially, about some of the activities of artists, actually, the artistic groups who are subject to eviction and gentrification, and how they were trying to fight and tackle the process by joining hands with other groups of tenants, other folk musicians, or scholars and activists and so on. So that's something quite new that came out from last year, and I'm still working with these groups last year and this year. So it might be actually useful, especially in the context of having this talk in the Department of Art. It will be useful to have that in an example as a way of kind of centering our discussions today. Let me start with just one kind of an interesting piece of information. So in South Korea, which is something you wouldn't normally come across in the discussion of gentrification literature, in 2000, up until 2014, the expression gentrification, and in Korean there's no other translatable term, so simply gentrification is written down in Korean characters using the Korean character basically. So the gentrification hardly appeared in mainstream media publications. So it only remained as a concept, as an expression within an academic circle up until 2014. And when you actually do the counting of the number of times that this expression appeared in mainstream media, only about probably less than 50 in total until 2014. And all of a sudden in 2015, the number shot up to reach about 400, 250, and depending on how you do the counting. And then this year, it even went up to reach about 800 times. So you can kind of see a huge increase in the number of expressions, the number of media reports that was basically reporting to gentrification in the reporting. And you always kind of wonder, what was actually provoking such increased attention to gentrification in South Korean context if the number was showing such a huge contrast. And that is something I would like to keep for now, and I'll come back to that quite soon. The another vignette to share at the beginning is this experience of eviction. So this comes from my own previous PhD research in 2002 when I was doing this comparative studies on urban redevelopment and experience of eviction in Seoul, in South Korea, and Beijing in mainland China. And this particular example comes from the Seoul neighborhood that I was studying in 2002. And especially on the experience of one of the evictees in this neighborhood that I was studying. And she was saying, I was in my second year of primary school when we were evicted and built a new house here. And she was referring to her experience in late 1960s. And the interview itself was in 2002, when she herself was subject to eviction as part of a neighborhood redevelopment. But she was trying to she was recollecting her experience about 30 years ago. It's been more than 30 years since then, since 1968. I came home after school in 1968, and my house was gone. I looked for my mom, and on a main road, there were my mom and dad on a vehicle that resembled one of those garbage trucks. That night, we came here, and the life in Nambo, the name of the neighborhood, began. And this is one kind of in a memory that she was recollecting, and this used to be the landscape of this neighborhood where she used to live, which became subject to wholesale demolition and redevelopment. And this became, after 5 years, something like this. Yeah? So a huge change. A neighborhood that used to accommodate about 10,000 people in 2002 basically became subject to demolition and redevelopment to accommodate this kind of new commercial estate. And you come to wonder, how do we evaluate this, such experience of neighborhood change? So on the one hand, you can have a very place-focused understanding, saying, well, this dilapidated neighborhood has transformed into something very nice, something with very modern facilities, housing, spacious housing for a family, and you have all the amenities that cater for the needs of various families here, housing management also up to a certain standard or the latest standards. So when you look at simply the physical condition, it's a very positive improvement. But of course, when you look at the change from more people-based understanding, and in this case, the majority of residents, about 70 to 80% of existing residents, were removed and displaced to other places, and only about 20 to 30% being able to come back to be rehoused in the neighborhood of the redevelopment. Then you get to wonder, what happened to those 70 to 80% people who used to live here? What were their experiences? And from their point of view, yes, the neighborhood changed despite providing very high standard latest commercial housing units. For them, it's such a terrible, tragic story. So this brings back to our discussion of gentrification, which is actually one of the very rare concepts in social science that looks at neighborhood change, that encompasses the entire cycle of neighborhood investment, disinvestment, dilapidation, and displacement and reinvestment to produce a completely new neighborhood to cater for the needs of more affluent people who have affordability to access what is redeveloped or what is renovated. So it's a kind of critical edge and some theoretical coherence provided by the concept of gentrification. Now, let's go back to sometime in the history, 1964, when the concept itself appeared for the first time in the literature. So this gentrification is one of those in a few concepts, again, academic concepts, which can actually trace the origin of each appearance. So it was 1964, a sociologist who used to teach at the University College London in the Department of Geography. So Ruth Glass, she was observing the neighborhood changes in North London, in Islington, a working class neighborhood at the time, to understand how the neighborhood was going through some changes, which were, and the changes involving largely the displacement of local working class families by incoming higher class or middle class families who are occupying dwelling, and these dwellings going through renovation one after the other. And over a period of time, when you actually look at the outcome of such changes, the incremental changes, the neighborhood itself simply having turned into a middle class neighborhood and no longer having the characteristic of working class neighborhood. And the dwellings themselves, now again, showing very different appearance, simply catering to the needs and taste of these incoming middle classes. So she was looking at the kind of in a writing that came out in 1964. She was looking at how this process of neighborhood change was taking place in inner city location London, and in a very incremental way, involving rehabilitation and also involving residential neighborhood as the main location of change. And this whole process involving the changes in class composition. And when you look at these four characteristics, class change, the composition, class composition changes in a city location, incremental rehabilitation, dwelling by dwelling rehabilitation, and also the last one, the residential space being subject to such change. These used to be, for many years, and even up until now, taken as the main definitional aspect when it comes to the discussion of gentrification. And this remains to be one of the strong points. And sometimes, and I'll come back to this point later, but this really depends on, this really influences on how we are to conceptualize gentrification in other times and in other places. Are we going to use these definitions to understand how gentrification is going to play out in recent years and after 1964? Or are we going to use these definitions also to understand gentrification in other places outside inner city London, right? And another point is where Ruth Glass was looking at the process and conceptualizing the process as gentrification in 1964 in her publication, but as Eric Clark in Sweden used to say, it doesn't necessarily mean gentrification all of a sudden began to appear from 1964. She was only conceptualizing it using the expression gentrification in 1964, but the process itself used to exist before 1964. It was only being able to be recognized by Ruth Glass in this way, right? So it also tells us something about where in many situations, in many different locations, we often come across with the argument saying where this place doesn't really exactly have the expression gentrification to refer to certain urban processes. But we can also always kind of question that, does it really matter if a place comes to have gentrification or not as an expression to understand certain urban process? Perhaps gentrification as an expression or as a concept may not be existing, but the process itself may exist in the way it used to be before 1964 in London. All right. So think about those aspects when as we go along in this talk today. So after 50 plus years, so since the publication of Ruth Glass, gentrification has come about to become very influential urban process, referred to by many publications, academic and other general readings or media reports and so on. And this is probably something that is known to be more generalized definition. So you can kind of compare this with what you saw in the earlier slide, the emphasis on inner city, rehabilitation, incremental change, and what was it, the residential neighborhood being subject to gentrification. But in this new, more latest definition by Eric Clark, who also questions the limitation of simply confining gentrification to 1964 London, comes to say gentrification can be regarded as a process involving a change in the population of land users, such that the new users are of a higher socioeconomic status than the previous users, together with an associated change in the built environment through a reinvestment in fixed capital. And I'll come back to this a bit more in here, in this slide. And this is kind of building upon the previous definition of Eric Clark, and trying to highlight those four characteristics to define what gentrification actually comes to refer to or comes to highlight. And this is more kind of generic definition, which doesn't get restricted to the 1964 London context. So capital reinvestment to take the advantage of the expanding rent gap, and I'll come back to what rent gap means in this quite shortly, and the social upgrading resulting in the changes in class composition and existing land users. And here the emphasis is on users, not just on tenants, since it may refer to many different types of residents or urban inhabitants, including not only poor tenants, but also poor homeowners, who also get priced out of the neighborhood change, and also other small businesses or artists who also have access to such land to make use of it, but who get also subject to eviction. Thirdly, the commodification space, and one probably example that I can take to explain this is, especially in the London context, when you look at the council housing estate becoming subject to gentrification, and that has become a very serious issue nowadays in London. Many of these existing former council housing estates being subject to redevelopment to make way for commercial development, and existing tenants or leaseholders being squeezed out. And that essentially is a process of commodifying the space and putting those council housing estates, which used to lie outside the real estate market, putting those into the real estate market for further profiteering activities. And lastly, yes, displacement of existing users. And when it comes to the whole discussion of gentrification, one of the key characteristics will be the issue of displacement, existing land users being subject to displacement. And here, I don't have, because of the time, I wouldn't go into too many details, but displacement is not going to be always necessarily involving physical direct displacement. Even if you get rehoused, so suppose this theater, take this theater as an example of a neighborhood. The first two rows get rehoused and they come back, but they get, or let's say the front 10 people get rehoused after redevelopment, and they come back while all the rest of people get completely displaced. These 10 people who come back, who are fortunate enough to come back to their neighborhood, living side by side with more affluent people who they no longer recognize. The neighborhood itself they no longer recognize because the neighborhood has simply completely changed to cater for the needs of more affluent people who pay for their dwellings to live here. These 10 people who come back after redevelopment no longer see their existing physical space as their own neighborhood. So despite physically they are still in the same space, psychologically they are as if being displaced from their neighborhood, as if they have moved to another place and in a completely alien environment. And that indirect and that kind of displacement, which Loretta Lees and with her colleague Mark Davison referred to as phenomenological displacement, is also going to be part of displacement stories. So this kind of tells us about one policy implication, which I have to kind of mention here before I forget. When you kind of discuss all the measures to minimize displacement, minimize the negative outcomes of gentrification, we have to go beyond simple acknowledgement of measures to bring back people to where they used to live. we have to think about one additional step that talks about how to recreate the kind of net environment so that these people, when they come back, still feel as if this place is one of their own, one place that they used to live, and feel more comfortable to continue their living. And that kind of additional measures to create more to create the kind of environment that people used to feel comfortable needs to be one of the steps to minimize the detrimental outcome of displacement. And I was telling you about the rent gap, and this is, the graph might look too complicated, but then it's very kind of straightforward, and it's really about understanding the difference between the ground rent that is being acquired on the basis of current use before any change, and the potential ground rent when the land is put into a higher and better use. So if you think of this place, again, being subject to some sort of change and reinvestment, before any change is taking place, this place will incur a certain amount of ground rent, which is going to be something that is to be in possession of landowners here in this room. If this theater is going to be subject to redevelopment, and to say there will be some commercial housing built over there, some buildings built over here, and this all potential to create a new use and attract investment will simply push up the ground rent to be acquired after redevelopment, right? And that's what is referred to as potential ground rent on the basis of future higher and better use. Yeah. So what this graph is trying to say is the capitalized ground rent on the basis of current use before any change takes place. And when you look at the potential ground rent, look at the potential amount of ground rent that can be acquired after change has taken place. The more the gap is going to be, the more the gap is widened, and the more potential the place is going to experience gentrification. Yeah, there's going to be more interest coming from developers who want to invest their money to change the use and therefore gain the ground rent income. There will be the government who want to also try to take the advantage of this widening rent gap to turn these neighborhoods into another use and take some tax incomes or other revenues coming from the changes in land use and so on. Yeah. So what this graph actually tells us is the material condition being created in a given space. But it also tells us, as it says on the right-hand side, this creation of the material condition is not to be taken as economically deterministic perspective, meaning that despite the ground rent itself becoming really widened, but you still have to have certain processes of political and social struggles to translate this potential into reality. And in order to turn this potential into reality, there will be a lot of discussions, a lot of things that you need to consider. Planning constraints. For example, a very simple way of experiencing ground rent exploitation is changing the planning regulation to allow higher density development. So if this theater, for example, is just a one row of students to see it in each row, right? Just a one layer. And at the moment, I don't know how many, maybe 200 students to be accommodated at best. So if you take the Goldsmith as developer, you only get a certain amount of money from 200 students who occupy this. All of a sudden, planning regulation changes, and you're allowed to add another layer, right? And then you come to have 400 students to be accommodated, and the 400 students to be accommodated here will create this additional potential to gain more income, right? So that also will push up the ground rent in this case. And that happens a lot in many different parts of the world where the government having the planning power simply changes the regulation to allow extra developmental potential to be added. And that create a higher density construction possibility, translating into higher potential to gain more ground rent income. Yeah? So that also happens. But government cannot change simply the regulation as they wish. It depends very much on the kind of political relations, the kind of political situations, and the kind of struggles that are going to be launched by other affected people, activists, artists, or policymakers, academics who are against this, and so on. So there will be a lot of fights going on, which actually determine the outcome of such translation of potential into reality. If you kind of stay away from these more concrete forms of gentrification that was observed by Routledge in 1964, and focus more on the generic definition that you see here about the potential to extract ground rent, exploit the situation to gain more rental income, and also commodify the space. And in doing so, existing users being displaced by more affluent and more powerful incoming users. We get to understand, yes, this can happen in many different parts of the world, many different places, at different times. And depending on local context, sometimes it may take the form of new build gentrification, like the entire neighborhood simply being demolished and being reconstructed. And this happens a lot, especially in East Asia. Like China, many Chinese cities, South Korean cities in the 1980s and 1990s used to see a lot of neighborhood-scale demolition and redevelopment. This also happens in London nowadays, where the entire council housing estate being subject to demolition and redevelopment. Not like the kind of incremental change Routledge was observing in 1964. Time has changed. Like 50 years later, the scale of development, the amount of money being involved, and the financing that is also part of the story has become such a huge, big story, huge scale, involving not only investors from London, your fathers and parents and relatives, but also investors from elsewhere outside London, but also all these people from outside the UK, from Russia, China, from Hong Kong, Singapore, who look at the potential to invest their money and make money out of their investment, all being part of the story in the council housing redevelopment, right? And all of these council housing redevelopment places are being advertised in newspapers in Singapore and Hong Kong, targeting these investors to make their investment in London or elsewhere in the UK. But that's not the entire story, right? We also see such processes now affecting not only residential space, but other commercial space. If you think of how such rental ground rent can be extracted by turning small businesses into boutique stores, and that also allowing you to reap more rental income from turning the use into something else. And if you look at Costa out here in front of the Goldsmiths, I don't know what used to be there, because I used to live here in this neighborhood about 17 years ago when I first arrived in the UK. Can't remember, but there was never an opportunity to have Costa or such a coffee store, chain store in this New Cross neighborhood. But now you have Costa, right? It simply changes, triggers the change to a certain direction. Now we can talk about all these issues of gentrification and look at how gentrifiable properties are being produced. That goes back to the discussion of renting to some extent. You can think about all these neighborhoods that you see, dwellings, the residential or commercial buildings that you come across. They may go through a certain lack of investment or certain constraints for various regions. Sometimes the regions can be racial regions where banks might, because of the concentrations of certain ethnicity or race, may decide not to give loans to investors when people apply for mortgage. So such a red line can be part of the story. You may also be part of the story when the government simply doesn't have any money and simply doesn't provide any support for existing businesses. Existing businesses going into decline phase and therefore lack of maintenance and simply the appearance looking very shabby and so on. And that also may happen. So on the one hand, you can look at the whole process of gentrification from the perspective of what sort of properties are being, what sort of spaces and properties are being created to be amenable to gentrification. You can also think about what sort of people, what sort of agencies are actually facilitating gentrification. So increasingly, unlike in 1960s, when Routledge was identifying gentrification, when it was the middle class families, increasingly nowadays it's the council government, which are actually behind gentrification. The Council of Southwark, for example, behind the gentrification of Highgate, for example. those are the kind of processes that we come to observe. So you increasingly see the central and the local stage being behind gentrification. And unlike middle classes or working with middle classes and other investors and developers, the government itself, along with other state apparatus, the police and the judicial forces and so on, promoting gentrification, working with developers and other businesses, right? So it's really about emphasizing the importance of looking at both aspects, production of gentrifiable properties, as well as all the gentrifiers who are actually actively involving in this process of gentrification. And this is just an example that was referring to Southwark's Haygate estate, which is becoming one of the iconic places for housing estate gentrification. Now the other story, and this comes to the point of looking at what planetary gentrification, how that was being conceptualized, and it's really about rethinking what globalization of gentrification actually means. So until fairly recently, when people talk about gentrification going global, and you come across with this expression, gentrification becoming a global phenomenon. And in academic discussions, and also in some media discussions, you come across with the expression saying, well, the kind of gentrification you see in London and New York, the usual suspect of gentrification, which have gone through the like a decades-long gentrification since 1960s up until recently. Some people may say if they export of this gentrification experience to other places, especially to other developing countries. So some people may refer to the process of how London's experience is being replicated in a place like Shanghai, or in Seoul, in Hong Kong, or in Mumbai, or in Rio de Janeiro, or in Sao Paulo, and so on. It might be true at some point, because if you look at the kind of policy moving from one place to another, like waterfront development becoming very popular nowadays. So in Cardiff, you see waterfront development. In London, you also see waterfront development. You see it similar in Tokyo. You see similar in Hong Kong, Singapore, and also in many Brazilian or other Latin American or Southern European countries. So you see, to some degree, policies get to shift from one place to another, creating similar forms of landscape. But on the other hand, if you also look at the emergence of gentrification on the basis of looking at the more generic process of exploiting rent gap, and that exploitation of the rent gap and commodifying space resulting in displacement, is in a way very much inherent in capitalistic system of accumulation, right? It's how increasing nowadays money is trying to make more income by simply turning real estate into highly investable properties. And the real estate aspect is becoming increasingly one of the most intensely contested characteristics in contemporary cities that create and widen inequalities nowadays. And this has been the case in London, in the UK, in many European countries, but this has also become the case in East Asia, which I'm going to switch to. But when you look at the process, and if you kind of consider gentrification as becoming more intrinsic and inherent in capitalistic system of accumulation, it doesn't necessarily have to be exported from one place to another. As long as a country and a city is going to experience the maturation and development of capitalistic accumulation and capitalistic and exploitative relationship, then you can kind of expect to see certain spaces being turned into higher and better use, and therefore gentrification becoming not necessarily imported from somewhere, becoming more endogenous, even though the name itself may not be existing in the place. In the same way, gentrification as an expression didn't exist before 1964, all right? So this is where we are trying to do, me and my colleagues, in this book, Planetary Gentrification. When you are looking at the previous question, this is the cover image of the edited volume I was telling you, which came out early last year. It was essentially to highlight the fact that when gentrification can be very much, it's not necessarily one gentrification model being exported to other places and therefore being replicated, but it might be more like this, more the story of gentrification emerging in different places because of the conditions being created to take the more out of turning a space into higher and better use. But because these, how they emerge in different places may have to reflect the local conditions, the forms and shapes and the intensity, the speed may all differ from one place to another, and therefore we use the expression gentrifications in plural forms, not gentrification. This was the main understanding behind the edited volume. And then we kind of try to push it further. Yes, but then yes, we do acknowledge the kind of plural ways of understanding gentrification, but also trying to emphasize how these different forms can be very much interconnected, and especially understanding the very logic of gentrification, building upon the generic understanding of what gentrification actually may mean in a capitalistic system of accumulation. And it's really about not prioritizing or giving privilege to certain places like London and New York, and saying London and New York is where the genuine gentrification happens, and all others are kind of a modified version of London and New York's gentrification. That's not what we want to emphasize. Each place needs to be put on the level analytical plane to highlight how the actual generic process of gentrification, the creation of the material conditions, actually come about to exist in multiple forms and shapes, reflecting the local conditions that can be found. It also means that in that regard, the strategies to fight gentrification will also have to be very much locally oriented. There may be some strategies that are to be adopted to fight the more generic process. So if commodification of space is what actually determines gentrification, as I was saying, the whole strategy of decommodifying space may also be one of the main strategies. But you can't say decommodification, saying, for example, let's just suppose that you go to a government saying, in a hypothetical place, and where we have to kind of make sure that this housing stocks, this amount of housing stocks in this city need to remain in communal ownership and put out of the real estate market, so that this can be used as a leverage when it comes to providing affordable housing units for poor people. But yes, if the very this course can have very different implications depending on where you're looking at. In some places, in the UK, yes, decommodification may have some immediate effect, immediate implication, and people may understand rather easily given the history of the purchase of council housing estates and the history of socialist or social democratic governments being present in the past. But if you kind of shift it to other very ultra-capitalist and anti-communist situations, like in South Korea, where a lot of the anything to do with North Korea, anything to do with socialist ideas, even liberalist ideas used to be associated with something communism. And the very discourse of decommodification will immediately incur some sort of kind of skepticism and some sort of kind of speculation. What are you talking about? Are you like a pro-North Korea or something like that? So the kind of translation of these discourses into different localities will also have to reflect the particular social and political relations that can be found. So the very idea of decommodification may also have to be put into a careful, put into certain type of discourse that caters or that meets the kind of local conditions. So it's really the endogenous gentrification that is behind the idea, and acknowledging the endogenous and the possibility of endogenous process of gentrification, despite the expression may not exist. Now, given the in the remaining time, about 6 to 7 minutes, let me just share the story of the South Korea, especially the experience of artists. And this, I put this in the context of how, in the South Korean context, is the whole speculation used to be quite rampant, and the whole condensation of urbanization experience. When you look at some of the studies, I won't go into details. When you look at the experience of achieving certain level of development, what used to take about 100 to 150 years in the West only took about 25 years in East Asia. This was the case in Japan, in China, in South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, or Singapore. Now, the condensation of developmental experience basically shrunken into a 25-year period within one generation creating this kind of a intensity of developmental experience having shared by local population. And you have the whole process of real estate property becoming really highly being commodified and becoming subject to investment by emerging middle classes, also by local governments as well, who want to take the most out of using these properties commercially. And this essentially simply shows the intensity of activities, especially from the 1980s, when the gray bars show the absolute amount of real estate investment having surged in the 1980s. And you kind of see that that's really a huge increase in terms of absolute amount of real estate investment in Korea. And this is another kind of indication to show the speculative environment that was existing or has been existing in South Korean context, where the daily commodity price increase between 1960s and 2013. The nominal price of rice and petroleum, gasoline, only 50 times increase during this 50-year period, whereas the land price 3,000 times increased. And you can kind of see where you can easily kind of imagine people having this idea. If I had some money, I would put it in housing and land rather than elsewhere, if you are expecting some high returns on investment. And that becomes the case for many families in South Korea in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century. And really, this is kind of showing a different expression of what gentrification may mean. The economic functions of space dominating, and social functions of space giving away to the economic functions, or in other words, in my expression, being subordinated to the economic functions of space. And the whole question of think about anti-gentrification is really reversing this relationship, so that social functions are more prioritized as economic functions being subordinated, not being simply deleted, but being subordinated to social functions of space. And this is where the experience of artist comes in. And I guess many of you know Psy, the Korean singer, who sang the Gangnam Style. Yeah, it's already something in the past, maybe. It's not fashionable anymore. But until a few years ago, Gangnam Style used to be one of the internet hits, YouTube clips and so on. Psy became at the center of these controversies last year and this year, because he was the landlord of one building in a very trendy places in central Seoul. And this building used to accommodate a gallery, a place which used to run gallery, which used to be a gallery space together with cafe space for some for the purpose of generating some income. But this, the gallery cafe space used to rent this property from Psy. But then, there were whole story, a few years of story before Psy became the landlord. But basically, what happened was Psy bought the building from previous landlord, and the gallery owner was renting the space from previous owner. When Psy bought the place, basically Psy wanted the gallery owner to leave, to evict the place, to move out of the place, in order to bring in another chain store cafe. So like something like Costa. So he wanted to bring in Costa kind of thing to the gallery space in order to gain much higher rental income, which was going to be probably I think it was about 4 or 5 times higher monthly rental income than what the gallery space owner used to pay the previous owner. So the whole dispute emerged, and there's all sorts of complexities, which I won't go into detail. But what happened was, in the course of fighting Psy, the gallery owners, who used to be herself used to be artist, and tried to create this gallery space to be embedded in the local in the neighborhood, so that she tried to promote some sort of artistic activities that take into consideration the neighbor conditions and create more connections between local neighbors and herself as well, and her gallery. Since early last year, she was basically facing the threat of eviction, was basically making use of every measure, every means to bring together different groups of people in the society, involving many different performances by musicians, or also feeling very vulnerable when these musicians were also all having the experience of eviction from their performance spaces, when their previous performance spaces were subject to gentrification, hence the spaces turning into some sort of restaurant or trendy cafes and no longer accommodating the activities of musicians. So they found this activity, this experience of gallery owner, something they could associate with, so they came to provide some support activities by launching some performances. They also did some sort of forums, irregular but became rather regular over time, inviting academics, including myself. You can kind of see my face on the right, on the bottom right corner. Or other activists, party members, opposition party members from the Labour Party or other more liberal party politicians, as well as other musicians, or all who are showing sympathy for this for the gallery owner. They were also trying to lobby the government or especially politicians by organizing forums and workshops to change the law, to make it more favorable for the protection of tenants, especially small business tenants who are becoming subject to the exploitation by the landlords. There's another image of the forum to come up with some policy alternatives and launching a protest. And the woman on the left-hand side is the owner of the gallery, who is now carrying out post struggle. Where this particular case involving her own gallery space has been resolved. The society eventually gave in and agreed to apologize, but informally, not making it open to the public, to gallery owners. But still, what happened was some compensation arrangement being made in order to recover the cost the gallery owner had to pay. But then still the outcome was the gallery owner having to move out, and Sai eventually being able to take over the property to do whatever he wants to do. And what she was kind of, and this is just some of the outcomes. And this is the final two slides. So this one, you cannot miss tonight for today's talk. So two lessons that came out from her experience, and this is what she was also sharing with me as well. In a way, when you look at the whole experience of gentrification, and if you look at the intensity of activities that has taken place in a place like Seoul, and you can see the same thing happening in London, where it's not simply a residential space that is subject to gentrification. It involves commercial space. It involves not only residential tenants, it also involves poor homeowners who are also being squeezed out when a place becomes subject to redevelopment, like leaseholders from council housing estates. It also involves artists, poor artists who happen to be in a place, contributing their labor and sweat equity to change the place, to make it more attractive, to think of something alternative, but unintentionally doing this as if they are like gentrifiers, when you look at the outcome. Artists making contribution, increasing the reputation, the profile of the space, which makes it very amenable to investment by larger scale developers who come in, raising the rent, and in doing so, the artists who still remain as irregular, unstable income owner, despite all the contributions, they being squeezed out because of higher rent, and in doing so, they become they contribute to gentrification. But at the same time, they become victim of gentrification as well. But it also includes students as well, right? So what the realization here is, everyone in this regard is in the same pot. And we really have to think about, when it comes to fighting the gentrification, have to really think about how to make the connection, how to bring this in a broader alliance that brings together poor tenants, as well as the poor homeowners who only has just one house without any extra house to make investment rental income, or students and not poor artists. Now, how to bring together these people with a broader understanding of the structural causes, they actually create this hardship for these different types of people. And this is where, let me just conclude this, the middle point here on the slide. It's really trying to come up with a new discourse that acknowledges the contributions being made by land users. Not at the moment in many capitalistic systems, what happens is ultimately the landowner, the property owner, claims the increase in value because of that property ownership, individual possessive ownership that exists. But if you kind of actually think about broader urban process, the actual increase in the value that a property may claim is actually being created by all the contributions made by consumers of the space, by the users of space, tenants especially, small businesses who actually put together their own efforts to increase, attract customers, and who in turn create the increase the reputation of the area, and which in turn resulting in higher rental income for property owners. But it's really the land users and the contribution hardly being recognized in the process of neighborhood change, and that becoming also very much the basis for very uneven way of appropriating the kind of the increased value that our space may command in times to come. So let me kind of conclude this. I'm sorry for running over a little bit, but I hope that you wouldn't mind that. But so thank you very much for listening. And I must say, I was actually in the midst of coming here after my talk, I want to thank Hyan for organization, for the invitation, and also want to thank the audience for being at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I mean, that's very difficult to happen, for being here and listening to us. Thank you very much.
I'll ask one question just to start it off. It is late and I think everyone's had a long day. So my question is about Richard Florida. In the art world, he's like the personification of gentrification evil. Because Richard Florida, if you don't know, is an American urbanist. He was a sociologist, worked with Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs was his mentor. And his notion was that his anxiety was the depopulation of metropolitan cities in the West, mainly. And his notion is to kind of regenerate cities and make them lively again. You need the 4 T's, big talent, tolerance, that's something else. But basically artists, creatives, gays, club culture, bars and so on, the kind of boutique world, was this kind of strategy for regenerating cities, which then became extremely attractive to policymakers and local governments because it worked. Right? So people like us would sort of go into broken down cities, kind of set up a cafe, and croissants, attract people from outside. So the kind of processes you're describing, it's a different phenomenon than the one you're describing. But so Richard Florida is kind of like a problem in the art world because he seems to be on the side of creatives, artists, and so on. But at the same time, he's saying that we're good instruments of capitalization within cities. So everyone hates him in the art world because it's like, you're right, but for that reason you're wrong. But in the context of your presentation, I mean, I was quite struck when you said gentrification doesn't have any kind of uniform or consistent phenomenological qualities. There's a logic generated by the rent gap. So it appears in different ways across the world. It's not a north to south or west to east kind of model, which it might look like if you look at what the buildings look like or the kind of shopping experiences and the rest of it. So there's a sense in which what's needed, and to come to the end, your argument is actually we need to look at users and how people use space and use buildings, use cities. We need to kind of look at rent control, repression of qualification and so on. And that seems like Florida's argument. Actually, what he's arguing is that you need to kind of ensure that artists, creatives, and so on who don't have lots of capital, aren't the big money makers, but make cities lively, continue to be in cities. So his more recent work is like, it's gone too far. We need to kind of continue to have conditions for creative spaces, because actually that's what makes cities interesting. And if all these people are displaced and moved out, then the city dies again, not from capital being cramed out, but from overcapitalization.
I mean, that's what.
I think that's what Florida. Yeah,
that's Florida's argument.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if he goes. If he use this again. I think it's working. It's working. Oh, it's working. You've got to speak directly. Okay. So I think I mean, I've not really sort of expected to mount a defense of Richard Florida, but I wonder whether the kind of placemaking concerns that are central to Florida's arguments would kind of support the struggle against the kind of rent gap model gentrification overall.
It's quite interesting to see the latest arguments being made by Richard Florida, because as you say, somehow when you look at I think it was a few weeks ago, was it on the BBC or the Guardian, Richard Florida was interviewed or was quoted as the anti-gentrification person, which was like, wow.
Yeah.
Richard Florida being in an anti-gentrification.
Yeah, but Trump's president.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of transforming himself into something else, which is very bizarre, to be honest, and it doesn't make any sense. But yes, he's kind of recreating himself, probably repositioning himself in this way to cover up the kind of detrimental impact he has made. But when you're also, going back to this issue of an experiential process of gentrification, what is being argued in our book and in my work is not necessarily disregarding these different forms and shapes that can be found in different places, but it's more about how to take into consideration these different ways in which a particular localized experience of gentrification emerges. So you can only do this by having understanding of both the generality and the particularity of the process. And that's what we are trying to highlight. On the one hand, yes, the generality of the process. If you think of the London's experience of gentrification from 1960s up until now. So assuming that London is the usual suspect of gentrification, we see many different forms and shapes of gentrification emerging in London, right? Starting from the roof glass type of 1964 style of incremental change subjecting residential space to 21st century council housing estate redevelopment, which are all coming with different forms and shapes. And even if you kind of limit your attention to London, you come to start wondering what is the more kind of underlying in a general kind of process that actually connects all these London-specific experiences of gentrification across different time periods, right? Then you already come up with the idea of where perhaps gentrification. When you discuss gentrification, we talk about the actual form and shape of gentrification to understand how it appears in a place like New Cross versus in a place like Canary Wharf. But at the same time, while doing that, we need to also pay attention to what kind of generality of the process itself. And here, the generality from our understanding and my understanding is really the rent gap and so on. So, taking this back to the discussion of creative city and creative class, and of course, this is going to be leading to something like, yes, what do you do? And artists and all these creative class people who make contributions to increasing the reputation of a given place. Their efforts needs to be acknowledged, but at the same time, in a sense, we are all potentially gentrifiers. And this doesn't matter whether you're an artist, whether you're a student, or whether you're an academic. In a way, everyone is in this boat together in a sense that you're always going to be subject, either going to be a gentrifier or the victims of gentrification. And this is more about what is being emphasized in my talk is really about how understanding kind of more broader structural issues that come to produce the whole pressure of gentrification and displacement. But when it comes to actual making actions to challenge and to understand more localized the process of gentrification, you need to really pay attention to the local context within which this generic form of gentrification comes to have, how they come to evolve and emerge in a given context. I don't know. I don't think I was answering your question directly, but
No, well, I guess. Let me just see if there's any questions. I've got a few more, but I just want to. There's one there. There's one.
So I guess my question is about the idea of, you use the word better in your presentation, and for me that seems to be inherent with kind of both sides against and for gentrification in terms of Richard Florida, but also where you're coming from. And I guess my concrete example would be of trying to think about policy and how councils look to kind of use the term better. And a concrete example is New Bermondsey that's coming up in 2 years as such. So it's been a 10-year plan, and that will develop 2,000 new homes, it will create jobs, it will have a new overground station. Now that is based on the idea of policy making being that the kind of criteria is that you have low wage earners, you have illiterate children, you have people moving in and out of the council. So I don't think it's actually fair and right to be thinking about councils that they're looking at it in a merely profit perspective. It's that they're using this idea of betterness as a driving force to create a new type of living. And obviously the problem with that is that becomes difficult for people who are living there currently to actually engage in that, because it's it's higher rent, it's more difficult for them to do that. So I wonder what you think about the idea of kind of councils using that type of criteria to engage and create redevelopment.
Do you want me to respond direct? Well, I mean, the expression in a higher and better use is really the expression of of gentrifiers, developers, government. They are gentrifiers. So, putting a property into higher and better use, that's really the language of developers, the language of gentrifying council estate, council government or local government and so on. And of course, it's a very subjective definition, of course, better than what, yes. And what is also quite problematic is, and this is what another scholar named Brett Christophers was trying to highlight in his discussion of Croydon, redevelopment in Croydon. And he was identifying like 3 different types of knowledges being employed by local government. One of which includes like let me try to remember. I think it's like a scalar knowledge, which is one, and scalar knowledge and biopolitical knowledge, and the other one is I think symbolic knowledge. Scalar knowledge referring to the way in which the council government trying to justify the redevelopment of Croydon by saying, well, although this may not be entirely benefiting all the residents within Croydon, within this particular area, it will at least benefit London citizens. So, London citizens having better access to, more improved facility and higher standard housing and so on and so forth. And that become used as a logic to justify. And also biopolitical knowledge is really about quite similar to what you are highlighting. the kind of poor conditions, which are poor conditions of dwellings and neighborhood in areas which are subject to redevelopment, and how these conditions are actually against the well-being of local people. And if you kind of think of it, if those conditions are against the well-being of local people, we have to think of how the well-being can be enhanced by improving the conditions and which are going to benefit local people directly, but that doesn't happen. So that well-being rhetoric being used as a way of bringing more money into the neighborhood, and then turning the area into, yes, what they refer to as higher and better use, and that becoming very much at the expense of local residents and well-being in this regard. So that combination of both rhetorics becoming, a driving force for changes in a place like that.
And then a kind of sub-question would be, what do you think about artists or kind of practices within the art field that are trying to address that? In Brendan Martin's doing a very good case in Point, who's coming up next.
And this is where I can go back to the experience of the gallery owner and other artist group that I've been working with. Essentially, I think there are kind of yes, on the one hand, the artists are going to be, and there's already the expression like art-led gentrification. Yeah, that's one of the kind of established concepts in the literature, which refer to the way in which the artistic activities contribute to the raising of the profile of a place, and that eventually leading to higher rent and attracting more investors, who eventually over time drive these artists away from the area. And so that, referring to the way artists become the gentrifiers and as well as victims of gentrification. What these artists or the gallery owner was telling me, and her colleagues were telling me is, they never knew they would be gentrifiers. So they were operating in this neighborhood for some years, about 5 years, or 3, 4, 5 years. And in doing so, they came to the realization that they were actually contributing to the increase in property value in this area. So other developers taking the advantage of the attractiveness created by these artists, and taking that as a way of investing more, attracting more investment. And when they were looking at the entire process and reflecting on the way in which the neighborhood has been changing over time, while they were operating their gallery there, they came to this sudden realization that, wow, we are actually contributing to this gentrification. And they were actually quite shocked. And that also led to the realization that after this experience, so now they don't have the gallery space anymore, so they are thinking about doing something else. But they were thinking of in what way can you actually maintain the kind of activities that we are trying to pursue? Are we going to rent another space and start this entire cycle again? And then they might end up being gentrified again in another place. And they were kind of thinking very hard, very hard about how they can actually do something that can contribute to the society without being gentrifiers. It's a very difficult question, and this is something that they also come to realize. I don't have the right answer, but at the same time, what they were trying to do was, well, I believe in the potential of artistic intervention, where the artists actually do create this the product and other performances and so on, which actually highlight the tension that is being experienced by people who are being subject to gentrification. So a lot of these very exciting posters were graphical interventions that they were creating, or even the musicians were working together with this artistic group. They were even producing a compilation album called Anti-Gentrification, like basically asking different singer-songwriters to create lyrics and also other to express their frustration about the entire process and put those into an album to be and marketing it. And I think those kind of interventions do have particular usage and strengths in terms of educating and highlighting, educating people and also highlighting the existing contradictions in the society in the way scholars like academics will never be able to do. We may be able to write journal papers, we may be able to write some essays, make some interesting written interventions, but that one graphic image that powerfully delivers delivers the message of anti-gentrification, delivers the message of how this whole contradiction is profoundly problematic, and there's a great potential. Of course, how you use the tool that you have or the knowledge that you have is going to be depending on how you decide to use it, right? Academics like Richard Florida and many others may work together with government to contribute to gentrification. They do consultancy works, making money for working side by side with government officials and so on to facilitate the process, and that's how the knowledge is being used in one way. But other people who are very much critical of the process may try to fight the gentrification by thinking about different examples and try to analyze and shed light on ongoing experiences of gentrification struggles to make sure that this experience can be delivered to other places. So you also have academics working in both ways, and I'm sure academics, in the same way, in the way academics are working in both ways, artists and performers will also be in the same position. How they use their skills and knowledge, in which way will have different outcomes.
Okay, I see two. Can I just see how many more people I see? There's one here and one there. Any more? Okay, so we'll have these two questions and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned the development, or in your examples from Korea. Sorry, so in your examples from Korea, it was all like examples where the houses were actually demolished before they were rebuilt, and also the emphasis on displacement with gentrification was pointed out in your 4 or 5 main points. I was wondering, like when we look at the UK with the whole development of brownfield sites and inner cities, do you think that gentrification without displacement can happen?
Do you want to collect another one?
Sure. No, in pass to the top, we'll just take 2 questions.
Hi, my question is indeed related to these kind of alternate forms of gentrification. I also kind of agree with what Tanya's asking about brownfield sites. But I'm also curious, you've mentioned a few times this idea of deep modification. I'm hoping you might be able to unpack that a little more, because I'm trying to wrap my head around whether you see that as a strategy against gentrification. And I like what you're saying about these ideas of artists trying to kind of think of strategies to be anti-gentrification, but I also am kind of really familiar with Richard Florida and his arguments, and can you give any clear-cut examples of a successful anti-gentrification strategy that doesn't inherently turn into a paradox on itself?
Well, starting with the first question, brownfield site redevelopment, so gentrification without displacement. Well, that was exactly the topic of study by my colleague Loretta Lees and her previous PhD student Mark Davison, when they were looking at new build gentrification in the UK context and in the US as well initially. And 2 types of new build gentrifications. One is basically the existing core neighborhood turning into another use and displacing existing users when the neighborhood becomes redeveloped. Yeah. But the other type was the brownfield site redevelopment. The brownfield site redevelopment may not itself produce gentrification directly, but what they were arguing is when these brownfield sites become the landing point for further investment to arrive. So what happens is a lot of these neighboring adjacent areas experiencing increase in property price and so on, and that triggering further redevelopment in surrounding areas. So I guess that's what might be also happening in East End, in the UK, or like in other places, like where basically the Dockland area is what is actually seeing the primary side triggering further development along the South Bank and so on, triggering further and waterfront development, and then that becomes again having a knock-on effect in neighboring areas as well. So two ways can happen. So primary side wise, it may happen in a way that triggers further redevelopment and gentrification in surrounding areas by contributing to the increase in property value. So that's where we need to have a kind of more kind of scalar understanding of the process. So this is where I always emphasize, when you look at the experience of gentrification, try to highlight whether or not, trying to find out whether or not a place is going through gentrification. Very often people tend to try to find out the presence of gentrification in a given space. Yeah? And they try to kind of have a more kind of inward looking, and they draw the boundary. So this theater takes this example of the theater again. So when researchers come in and saying, is this place being gentrified? The answer can be either yes or no, or maybe, or in future, not now, but maybe in future, right? If you kind of have a very simplistic understanding, then we're hypothetically discussing this issue of gentrification of this theater, but we need to kind of zoom out as well. And then have an understanding of how this neighborhood of this theater is related to other surrounding neighborhoods. So like the wholesale clearance and redevelopment oriented, like council housing estate redevelopment. Yes, when you look at the council housing estate or informal settlement or any dilapidated neighborhood, neighborhood A being subject to demolition and redevelopment, if you look at that particular neighborhood space, yes, it's being clearly gentrified. But when you kind of zoom out, where do these people go, right? If you, especially at neighbor scale in a demolition and redevelopment, when hundreds of families are being evicted at the same time, where do these people go, right? So, when you look at certain where you can kind of imagine a situation in which these people moving to neighboring neighborhoods for various reasons, very often it becomes the schooling of their children, and they don't want to live away from their existing school zone, so they go to somewhere nearby. And this happened a lot in Seoul when I was in this neighborhood that I was studying. So the majority of these places from this neighborhood that you are seeing in the picture moved to neighboring places. But when you look at the experience of neighborhood adjacent to redeveloped place, it's actually densification, right? If they were able to find some dwellings which were able to accommodate themselves, the neighborhoods, surrounding neighborhoods, were actually seeing the process of densification, at least for that time period of immediately following the displacement of the people. So when you kind of zoom out, you have the kind of situation in which a neighborhood going through gentrification, while the neighboring places are going through densification. And therefore, you have to kind of think about how you actually operate at different geographical scale to understand in a more relative way what this process actually means in this geographical scale, and what would happen when you could zoom in or zoom out to understand more in a more relational way the kind of relations between different spaces. So this is where the boundary side redevelopment also becomes an issue. We need to zoom out to understand what the relationship between this boundary side is having with surrounding areas, and how that redevelopment will also have some impact on neighboring places as well. Going back to this discussion of decommodification, I think it's going to be a very important strategy. What London was standing out in the experience of gentrification, especially in, I think throughout the 70s and 80s perhaps, is really the presence of these council housing estates in central locations, which actually operated as barrier to citywide gentrification. So it was actually creating this kind of barriers in the spaces outside the real estate market, which acted as like a protection zones for poor people, so that despite the poor income status, or despite your certain immigration status and so on, they still had some access to central locations in London. And that's what is being attacked in recent years, when all these council housing estates like Highgate, that's why Highgate was one of the best examples, how these council housing estates, which used to provide the kind of protection zone for these poor people, now become subject to attack and being part of gentrification process. And in that, if we kind of take the example, we can take that lesson to understand what can be an alternative strategy and policy recommendation for other places. For example, so I also, part of my study looks at China and Beijing, for example, which was going through in a Beijing, China, if you even though you may not have full understanding of what China has gone through, what sort of changes over time, China being used to be a socialist country and still is nominally a socialist state. Up until the late 1990s, it still has some, and it was, where throughout the 1990s, it was going through a huge degree of marketization, reform, privatization essentially. So essentially turning all those public rental housing stocks, which were relatively in good condition, being sold to sitting tenants and so on. So that privatization was one major drive of the reforms in the 1990s. So in 1998, the Deputy Minister of Construction for the Chinese government was even saying in an international conference saying, China is now seeing 80% homeowners, 80% of Chinese families in cities are now homeowners. And this is entirely the reversal of the trend. It used to be, up until late 1980s, 80% of families in cities used to be public sector tenants. And it became simply the opposite. But that also meant a lot of these stocks in public ownership, which used to provide some protections for poor people, were sold off and became part of market commodities. And you can kind of see, and they are now trying to reintroduce social housing, seeing the kind of increasing inequalities in home ownership and real estate as such. They are trying to reintroduce social housing, but it's very difficult to do that because already all these central locations in the city areas, which have seen already the huge increase in property price and land price increase, it's difficult for the government with limited finance to come in and grab these properties to turn those into public ownership to provide protection zones for poor people. So in the end, what they have to do is, and what they are doing is going to more peripheral areas to secure land and housing, to turn those into social housing stocks. And that's already creating these difficulties. Yeah, you only end up having these properties for poor people in a more peripheral area without allowing them to have access to central locations. Yeah, so in a sense, you can have this kind of recommendation that can be given to many places where, if the government is thinking about doing similar, you can kind of already start arguing where we need to have certain properties outside the influence of the market speculation to remain in the safe zones. But that already takes us to discuss what about the nature and the role of the state. And some of you who look at the urban studies literature, we come across with the expression entrepreneurial state. And the state acting as if they are businesses, working closely with businesses, creating market and marketization, enhancing the market exploitation, providing all the regulations in favor of the market and so on. If the government is already orienting itself towards favoring businesses, telling them to create more conditions favorable for poor people, is going to have no effect.
Can I just to cover the line?
Sure.
Okay. Just a quick addition to this. Sadiq Khan has set up this policy initiative about protecting creative spaces in London. So small ex-factories full of fashion people and artists and so on. The GLA's, the London Authority, seems quite aware that these places need to be protected. Is that a form of decommodification? Depending on how the ownership is being proposed. So if you think of, I don't think an individual can actually resist the tide of gentrification. It's very difficult for one person
to stand in front of the huge tide of gentrification where the real estate speculation has become very rampant. And standing there with a plank of wood and saying, I want to resist the gentrification, it doesn't happen, right? If this kind of in a creative zone or whatsoever, any kind of district to be created and to be protected, I think the solution needs to accompany some sort of measures for these individual artists or anyone who falls into the category of protection, to come together, to join forces, to create a certain type of ownership that can be maintained and operated and managed by themselves, so that they have certain degree of leverage when it comes to negotiating with the government. So the government really, if Mayor Sadiq Khan wants to actually create this, I think they need to go a step further to basically hand over the ownership to the collection of artists, so that they actually, and then, well, not only handing over, but ensuring that the artists also have the understanding about their potential to become gentrifier, and for them to act in a way that doesn't make them investors, developers, but make the most out of the increased property value over time, and they themselves making the most out of such opportunities for their own sake, without actually sharing those with other communities. So I think that all has to come together with the government's attempt to hand over the ownership of changes, together with the artistic groups, having some degree of clear understanding of their own position in the society, so that they can share the outcome with the rest of the community.
Thank you. Before you thank you, just to remind you, Michaela Benson next week is speaking about precisely these processes very locally to us. And then the week after, Renzo Martins is coming in to talk about his Institute of Human Activity, which is an effort to gentrify the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But also we have a group tutorial set up with Renzo for that Monday afternoon, which is the 28th, I think. Ruth is going to send out some information about signing up for that. There'll be 3 or 4 of you on the Fine Art program between 2:30 and 4:30 just before his talk. So we'll set that out this week. So make sure you sign up if you're interested. And thank you for a huge amount of work this evening.